This isn't just a story about a sister's betrayal. It's a sibling betrayal. Revenge you won't forget. She raised $18,000 using my pain to build her image. But when I leaked 2 screenshots during her live charity gala, her perfect world fell apart in front of everyone. If you've ever been used by family and left behind, stay. This story might just be your closure. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I turned slowly into the narrow drive. Rain lashed sideways across the windshield, blurring the outline of what lay ahead. An old house hunched under gray skies like it had been trying to disappear for years. Peeling siding, boarded windows, a porch so warped it seemed to wince under the weight of its own existence. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't even habitable, but it was mine. All $900 of it. I shut off the engine and sat in the car for a moment, letting the silence bloom. My coat lay bunched in the passenger seat, still damp from earlier. Everything smelled like wet wool and resolve. This wasn't the dream, but it was the beginning of something I hadn't had in a long time control. When I finally stepped out into the cold, I moved slowly. The kind of slow that comes after something permanent shifts inside you. I opened the trunk, pulled out an old folding chair I used to keep for writing breaks in parks, and carried it to the edge of the porch. The mud tugged at my boots like a warning. I unfolded the chair, sat down, and exhaled. I should have felt proud, empowered, maybe, but I didn't. What I felt was exile. Only days earlier, I'd been at my parents' house for dinner, sitting stiffly at a table set with candlesticks and strained silence. My sister Vanessa was aglow with excitement, scrolling through photos of her upcoming spiritual retreat in Sedona, $15,000 of crystal sound baths and chakra alignment. It'll reset everything. My mother cooed, pouring another glass of white wine. She deserves this after the year she's had. Vanessa smiled like a saint. My father nodded, eyes flicking toward me. Claire, you said the money would be wired last week. What's the holdup? My fork paused mid-air. I looked up and said it as gently as I could. I didn't send the money. I bought something else. Cutlery froze. Wine sloshed slightly in its glass. Vanessa tilted her head. You bought something. A house. I said it's a fixer-upper. But it's mine. I could feel the collective temperature in the room drop. My mother's lips tightened like a purse string. You spent your savings on yourself. Dad's tone was ice wrapped in velvet. Vanessa let out a light laugh. You chose a rotting shack over helping your family. That is so you. I kept my voice level. I never promised to pay for the retreat. I just didn't say no out loud. And that apparently was enough to sign a contract in this family. Silence meant consent. Dissent meant betrayal. Mom placed her glass on the table with a decisive clink. You've chosen poverty. Claire, don't expect us to enable your delusions. I opened my mouth, but Dad cut me off. If you want to be on your own, then be on your own. That night, my name disappeared from the family group chat. The next morning, I got the text, do not come to Easter. No love, Mom. No explanation. Just that quiet surgical erasure, the kind that doesn't scream, it simply deletes. I didn't cry. Not then, not right away. I just stared at the screen like it was a menu in a language I no longer recognized. Then, I closed my phone and slid it into my coat pocket as if folding away a part of myself. I wasn't sure I needed anymore. I'd always been too much for them. Too serious, too intense, too honest. Vanessa could flake on commitments and still get a party. I could graduate with honors and get at best a distracted good job. Love in our house had a scoreboard and I was never the home team. I shifted in the folding chair. Rain now, a steady rhythm on the roof above me. The house loomed silently ahead like a secret I wasn't supposed to uncover. They hadn't yelled. They hadn't slammed doors or cursed. They simply shut me out. I used to think that was better. But this kind of silence, it seeps. It fills the cracks of your identity until you wonder if you were ever really there in the first place. Growing up, Vanessa's every milestone was a family event. Her homecoming crown framed her average report cards, celebrated with balloons, my statewide writing award. A footnote. One year, they forgot my birthday until I reminded them the cake had my name spelled wrong. Claire, no I. They never forgot Vanessa's name. The truth is, I don't think they ever saw me fully. They saw the parts of me that were useful. The tech-savvy daughter who helped design Mom's nonprofit website, the reliable sister who picked Vanessa up from parties when her phone died, the good girl who didn't complain even when she should have, but not Claire the person. And when I finally did something just for me, even something as simple and unglamorous as buying a crumbling house, they decided I was disposable. Now, sitting in front of a house that most would call worthless, I finally understood what I had done. I'd refused to keep playing a role in a story I didn't write. I'd chosen something broken. Not because I deserved broken things, but because I could rebuild this. I could choose it freely, fully. The wind picked up. I wrapped my arms around myself and let it whip across my face like it was trying to test my resolve. My phone buzzed again. I didn't even look. More silence. More doors clicking shut behind me. But here, with the sky darkening and the smell of wet soil around me, I realized something else. This house may be falling apart, but it had more room for me than my own family ever did. And that was worth more than anyone at that dinner table could understand. I wasn't lost. I wasn't crazy. I was a woman with a key in her hand and no one left to ask permission. Sometimes freedom doesn't feel like flying. Sometimes it feels like rain on your skin, a creaking chair in gravel, and the knowledge that no one is coming to rescue you and you no longer need them to. I sat a while longer in the rain. And when the cold started to settle into my bones, I stood up, picked up the folding chair, and turned toward the front door. The handle stuck. The screen door moaned, and something splintered under my feet, but I stepped inside anyway. The first night in the house was colder than I expected. Not just the draft slipping through the cracked window panes or the groaning of wind under the eaves, but something deeper. A chill that sat inside my bones coiled there like a question. I hadn't dared ask out loud. I lay on the floor wrapped in 2 old quilts, the kind that smelled faintly of cedar and memory. Above me, the ceiling sagged, stained with rings of rain long past. Around me, silence. No texts, no group chats buzzing. No one asking when I'd be home. The quiet was total. And for a moment I wondered if this was freedom or just a more honest kind of loneliness. Then, like a thread being pulled, it came my 16th birthday. I don't know why that memory chose that moment to surface. Maybe because it had always lingered at the edge of my mind, insignificant on the surface, but sharp where it mattered. I remembered the living room lights dimmed the cake from the grocery store, the candles stuck in haphazard angles like a rushed apology. I remembered the pink frosting, the too sweet scent, and Vanessa's proud voice saying I helped decorate as everyone clapped. Then I saw it, my name on the cake. Happy birthday. Clary. No one noticed, not until I did. It's spelled wrong, I said, pointing gently. Mom waved a hand. Oh, don't be so serious, Claire. It's just a cake. You always take things too personally, Dad added. Learn to let things go. That phrase it became a script I was forced to memorize. Let it go. Don't make things awkward. Don't ruin the mood. Even when the mood never quite included me. That same year, Vanessa got a used Volkswagen for her birthday. It wasn't new, but it was clean, shiny, and parked in the driveway with a bow on top. Dad stood next to it beaming like she'd cured cancer. You deserve this, sweetheart. You've had such a hard year. She had a C average, 2 skipped finals. But she was beautiful. She smiled easily. She knew how to cry at just the right moment and melt into hugs. She made their world make sense. I got a maybe next year when I asked about driving school. The car wasn't the point. It never was. It was the accumulation of small things. The gestures, the forgotten milestones, the misplaced affection that painted the real picture. Looking back, I don't think anyone ever yelled at me growing up. I didn't get punished. I didn't get grounded. I got forgotten, like a background extra in the film of someone else's life. There was a photo from my college graduation that lived on the family wall for years. I remember standing there that day flushed with pride in my thrifted navy cap and gown, smiling harder than I probably should have. We handed a stranger a phone to snap a photo. Vanessa stood in the middle, holding up her camera to document the moment. She blocked me almost entirely. I asked for a retake. Mom laughed and said, "Oh, it's fine, honey. We'll fix it later." They never did. They printed that version, framed it, and hung it next to the front door. A photo where the only visible part of me was a sliver of shoulder behind Vanessa's long blonde hair. Every time I came home, I passed that frame, and every time I felt the same quiet question echoing inside me. If I disappeared completely, would they even notice? It sounds dramatic, but erasure isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a long silence that reshapes you. A shrug when you win a scholarship. A blank look when you share a dream. Don't make a fuss. When you try to stand up for yourself. I learned to shrink, to translate every disappointment into gratitude, to smile when I wasn't invited, nod when I was overlooked. And still, somehow, I hoped that one day I'd be enough. Mom used to say I was born 40, that I worried too much, thought too hard, tried too often. "You're too intense, Claire," she'd say, sipping from her mug. "Relax a little. Not everything is a battle, but some things are, especially when the war is the quiet kind, the one where love is a currency and you're always bankrupt." I stared at the stained ceiling and wondered how much of me had been shaped by trying to be digestible, how many rooms I'd entered wondering if I was too much, when really I'd been made to feel like not enough. When Vanessa cried, she was sensitive. When I cried, I was fragile. When she failed, they asked what she needed. When I succeeded, they reminded me not to gloat. None of this was violent. There were no broken dishes, no bruises, just calibration. A family tuned to someone else's frequency, and I was always the static. They didn't hate me. That would have been easier. They simply never saw me, not fully, not without filtering me through their expectations or Vanessa's shadow. That might be the cruelest kind of love, the kind that smiles while it forgets your name. I got up, stretching my stiff legs, and walked toward a half-unpacked box near the door. I dug through it, pulling out a photo album Aunt Irene had given me years ago. She always said I reminded her of her younger self, the one who read too much and smiled too little. Inside was a faded Polaroid of me age 8 in a paper crown from a school play. In the background, slightly out of focus, was Aunt Irene clapping like her life depended on it. The only one who ever clapped for me just because I existed. I pressed the photo against my chest and sat in the corner of my new home, cold, cracked, half abandoned. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible, and I whispered into the quiet. They didn't forget me. They chose not to see me. That's not the same thing. It started with a knock on the door, 3 sharp taps like punctuation marks. I was standing in the hallway halfway through painting the trim of the living room, hands covered in flecks of antique white. The knock came again, crisp, confident. Not the knock of someone unsure. The knock of someone entitled. I pulled the door open, brush still in hand, and there she was, Vanessa. One stiletto heel tapped against the cracked porch like it offended her. Her coat was cream cashmere belted neatly at the waist. Sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. Even standing still, she looked staged. "Wow," she said, sweeping her gaze across the chipped siding and patchy yard. "You weren't kidding." "It really is rustic," I said. Nothing. Just leaned against the frame, arms crossed, heart bracing for whatever script she was rehearsing. She didn't wait. So funny story. A pipe burst in the spa wing. Total nightmare. Water everywhere. It's being handled, but I kind of need a place to crash for a night or two. I raised an eyebrow. "Don't look at me like that," she added, her voice syrupy. It's not forever. I can sleep anywhere, even here. The words hit like slaps wearing perfume. I should have said no, but I didn't. Maybe because some small part of me still craved her approval. Or maybe because I wanted to believe she'd changed. One night I said finally, "Don't touch anything." Her smile lit up like I'd handed her the deed. "You're the best. Seriously. You always were. It's why people walk all over you." She breezed past me, heels clicking across the worn floorboards like she owned them. I stood at the door for a long time after she passed, watching the place she'd just occupied. The room felt altered, like it no longer belonged to me. That night I slept restlessly on the couch, ears tuned to every creak. Vanessa had taken the bedroom, of course, claimed it without asking, said she needed to recharge her aura in a room with a door. I woke up to the smell of oat milk and something far worse. Laughter. Not the warm kind, the kind that makes you brace. I padded into the kitchen sweater thrown over my tank top. The floor groaned under my feet like it wanted to warn me. And there she was, full face of makeup, ring light set up near the window, phone perched on a tripod. My kitchen, my peeling, barely functional kitchen, had been turned into a live stream set. "We love a fixer, don't we?" Vanessa chirped into the screen. "This is where my sister's been living." Bless her heart. It's kind of like storm shelter. Chic. She panned the camera across the mismatched chairs. The ancient fridge, the cracked linoleum. "This fridge hasn't worked since like Y2K, she joked, kicking it lightly. "It's giving generational trauma." I froze in the doorway. Then I heard it comments chiming in on her phone screen. "Is this a shelter?" "Oh no, poor thing. She looks like she's squatting." Vanessa didn't blink. She tilted the camera toward me and smiled. "Yep, that's her. My brave little sister. Don't worry, she's okay." Kinda. My stomach dropped. Something inside me cracked. Not loud, not violent, just final. I walked over, calm as a storm held back by string, and pulled the phone off the tripod. The suction of the pop socket echoed in the silence. "Hey!" she shrieked. "What are you doing?" I looked her dead in the face. "You want content? Here's your headline. Get out of my house." Her mouth fell open. "I was just trying to help. People care. Claire, they donate. It's awareness." "You mocked me in my own home," I said. "You turned my life into your backdrop." I handed her the phone, like it was something dead. She gathered her makeup bag, her tote, her charger, all of it in one dramatic sweep. And as she passed me, she said loudly enough for no one in particular, "This is what I get for trying to be a good sister." The door slammed behind her. The ring light buzzed faintly in the sudden stillness. I stood in the kitchen, breathing hard. Then I turned and saw the screen of her phone still lit, comments pouring in, hearts, tears, emojis, and a title banner, "Help my sister. Rebuild. She's been through so much. Let's give her a life she deserves." My face was the cover image. Mid-step sweat on my brow hair tied back. Another photo showed me curled up in the corner of the couch under Aunt Irene's quilt. Amount raised $18,340 recipient. Vanessa Vale. I stared at it for a long time. She hadn't said a word. Not when she walked in. Not when she filmed. Not when she left. No mention of the fundraiser. No mention that I was the product she'd packaged. The mug in my hand cracked from how tightly I was gripping it. I tried to report the fundraiser, but the platform returned a response. "This campaign does not violate our community guidelines." Of course it didn't. She hadn't lied outright, just staged it, framed it. Let the audience make the assumption while she smiled. I opened our last text exchange. It was blank. Then just as I was about to shut my phone off, a new message arrived, a name I didn't recognize. Hi, Claire, I saw the GoFundMe. You didn't authorize that, did you? I blinked. I'm a paralegal. Colorado bar certified. What your sister did. It looks like civil exploitation, possibly wire fraud. Want to talk receipts? My heart didn't race, it steadied. Finally, someone saw it. Not just the betrayal, but the structure, the strategy. I typed one word. Yes. The message from the paralegal. Elsie sat at the top of my screen, like a door I wasn't sure I was ready to open. But the longer I stared at it, the clearer it became. Vanessa had made a performance out of my pain, and now it was time for me to step backstage and cut the power. Yes, I finally typed. I didn't authorize anything. Elsie replied almost instantly. Cool. Start with screen recordings. Capture timestamps. Comment threads. Title edits. Anything that shows public perception was built on falsehood. Don't confront her yet. Trust me, we'll let the paper do the talking. Her tone was sharp but kind, like she'd helped women like me before, women who weren't taken seriously until someone else put it in writing. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. I combed through every frame of Vanessa's live streams, downloaded her Instagram stories, tracked donation commentaries, screenshots of captions that changed after backlash. I didn't just see the lies anymore. I saw the framework. The way she filmed from low angles to exaggerate the cracked ceilings, the bless her heart tone she used to paint me as both pitiful and saintly, the way she avoided saying I was homeless but let people believe it anyway. I labeled folders, color-coded timelines. Not because I needed vengeance, because I needed evidence. Elsie and I met on Zoom under a grainy screen with 2 mugs of coffee and 2 lifetimes of women being dismissed. She looked to be in her 40s, sharp glasses, sharper eyes. People like your sister, she said, rely on the assumption that you'll stay quiet. You're not the first woman I've helped who got turned into a charity case without consent, but I can help you make sure you're the last one she tries. She walked me through the next step. A cease and desist, a formal demand that Vanessa take down the fundraiser, issue a statement, and stop using my likeness or property in her content. I want her to receive it mid-live stream, I said, almost surprising myself with how calm it sounded. Elsie smiled. Savage, I like it. I'm not trying to be savage, I said. I'm trying to be heard. She nodded. Then let's make it impossible for her not to listen. 2 days later, it was ready. The letter was sharp, surgical. It named every lie, every implication, every scent collected under the false pretense of care. It read like a scalpel, and it would cut through her curated world exactly where it needed to. The courier was scheduled. The event was set. Vanessa had been teasing her biggest livestream ever, an online Q&A called Healing After Hurt, where she'd speak about how hard it is when your own family resents your success. I watched the countdown timer flicker on her page with a strange, settled heart. Not bitter, not boiling, just clear. The screen lit up. There she was, framed in muted earth tones, seated in front of a faux bookshelf lined with self-help books and polished crystals. Hi, beautiful souls, she purred. I know there's been a lot of noise lately, but we're here to talk about truth and grace and how to stay kind, even when you're attacked by people you love. Attack, that was rich. The chat lit up with hearts and affirmations. Her followers hung on every word, midway through a question about maintaining peace when others refused to heal. Someone stepped onto the set behind her, a man in a crisp polo, holding a thick manila envelope. Vanessa's smile froze. The courier said something off mic. She blinked, flustered, then took the envelope, her manicured fingers suddenly unsure. She glanced down, flipping the first page. I imagined her eyes moving past the firm letterhead, the phrase unauthorized misuse of likeness, and stopping at the line that stated, "You are hereby ordered to cease and desist all monetization or representation of Claire Harrow's property, personhood, or image." The stream didn't cut immediately, but the tone did. Vanessa's practiced voice faltered. Her camera angle shifted. The chat blew up. What's happening? OMG? She looks panicked. Why'd she stop smiling? The courier stepped off camera. Vanessa mumbled something about technical issues and then black screen stream offline. Just like that, I didn't clap, I didn't cheer, I didn't post a cryptic tweet or write a blog post titled, "Justice Served." I just sat there on my second-hand couch sipping lukewarm tea and let the weight of it settle in my chest. Elsie texted 5 minutes later. Well, she read it. Then she added, "Breathe, Claire. The paperwork talks now." That sentence stayed with me. For years, I'd tried to explain myself, tried to soften my disappointment, cushion my boundaries, justify the spaces I dared to take up. But now, for the first time, I didn't have to speak at all. My truth came with a signature and legal backing, and in that silence I found something better than victory. I found clarity. I spent the rest of the evening baking banana bread for the neighbor kids and repainting the side door. Something about the contrast, one life falling apart while mine finally began to mend, felt poetic. Vanessa's curated version of me had started to crack. And now, for the first time in years, the real me was being written back into my own story. The Grand Hilton's ballroom shimmered with false warmth, golden lighting, faux florals curling out of glass centerpieces, and an event banner strung above the stage that read, "Vanessa Cares Healing Families One Heart at a Time." I stood outside for the long minute, letting the chill settle into my coat sleeves. Behind me, a valet offered to take my car keys. I handed them over with a polite nod, but inside, everything was taut. I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to witness. Inside, the air buzzed with curated energy. Champagne flutes, clinked heels echoed on polished floors, and every third person had a phone in hand, angling for the best candid shot. At the center of it all, Vanessa, draped in a seafoam green gown that caught every spotlight she moved like she'd never been knocked off a pedestal. Her hair swept perfectly over one shoulder, her laugh soft, performative, and just loud enough for passing ears. It was almost artful how she'd rebranded herself. Again, I slipped into a seat at the back. No one noticed, no one looked twice, and that suited me fine. The program began with a pre-recorded testimonial, an influencer talking about how Vanessa's foundation transformed her mother's access to healing tools. Then came a reel of community initiatives, half of which I'd never heard of, some of which were clearly stock footage. Then Vanessa took the stage. "Thank you all for being here," she said, voice polished and trembling in just the right places. "It means so much to be surrounded by people who understand the power of radical kindness." She paused, hand to her heart. "There's been noise recently, misunderstandings. But tonight isn't about that. Tonight is about clarity and connection." The audience clapped, subdued and reverent. She gestured toward the large screen behind her. "Let's celebrate the work we've done together." The lights dimmed. The first few slides glowed like a Pinterest dream, children's art projects, garden kits delivered to families in need, a photo of Vanessa standing in front of a battered home mine, though my name was nowhere to be found. The caption read, "Transforming Trauma into Beauty." I felt my jaw tighten. Then, it happened. The screen flickered, just once. Then again. The next slide wasn't a staged PR image. It was a screenshot of a message thread, grainy, raw, unmistakably real. "Let her rot in that dump I gave them, the GoFundMe link for PR. Cry for me, baby." The room rippled with gasps. Before the noise could die, another message appeared. "She's good for sympathy points. Keep the cameras low. Show the cracks." Vanessa didn't move. Her smile collapsed in stages like a mask sliding down a face. Someone behind me whispered, "Is this real?" A journalist across the aisle began recording. The hashtags were already being typed. Ciao. Vanessa exposed. Let her. Rot leaks. Trash fake charity. Unveiled. Vanessa's voice cracked as she stammered, I think there's been a technical error. That was not. This wasn't part of the... But the damage was done. No one clapped. No one smiled. The trust that filled the room moments ago had evaporated, leaving only questions. And then from the side aisle, a woman stood Aunt Irene. She walked calmly toward the stage, her navy dress as quiet as her reputation. Unlike Vanessa, she carried no mic, no script, just presence. Vanessa backed away instinctively, as if sensing she no longer held the center. Aunt Irene stepped up and took the microphone. "I was invited here tonight to speak on hope," she began, her voice steady, weathered but strong. "To talk about what it means to repair what's been broken." She paused, scanning the room. Her gaze, even and clear, cut through the tension like light through dust. For too long, this family and many others have mistaken performance for love. We've praised appearances, allowed charisma to outshine character. We've celebrated those who know how to speak loudest while dismissing those who quietly endure. A few heads bowed. "I won't pretend anymore," she said. "Tonight I stand not with what looks good on a flyer." She glanced deliberate at the banner behind her, but with what is right. The silence that followed was profound. No background music, no polite claps. Then from somewhere near the back the applause began. Slow, sincere, then swelling. I stood as Aunt Irene stepped down and made her way toward me. No camera followed her. She didn't smile for the crowd. She just came over and hugged me, fully, fiercely. "The way someone hugs you not for optics but because they see you," she whispered. "You didn't deserve any of this," and I believed her. Vanessa was already gone. I heard later she'd slipped out the side exit, trailed by her assistant, muttering about sabotage and defamation. But her voice no longer mattered. The next morning, every major lifestyle blog carried the story. Wellness icon, caught exploiting sister for profit. GoFundMe, scandal rocks, Vanessa Cares brand. From influencer to infamous sponsors withdrew. Donations dried up. Her podcast was pulled indefinitely for restructuring. No one answered when she called for damage control. And I went home to the crooked house that used to embarrass her. I made coffee in a chipped mug. I watered my little herb pots. I stood at the window and watched the sun rise over broken shutters. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to explain who I was. Because the truth had finally spoken, and everyone had heard it. The days after the gala unfolded like slow thawing ice. Quiet, tentative, and strangely beautiful, I began by painting the kitchen walls a warm yellow. The kind that made even cloudy mornings feel like summer. The house still creaked when the wind shifted, but the silence inside wasn't so sharp anymore. It felt lived in, not empty. A neighbor, an older woman named Jean with a garden full of stubborn tomatoes, knocked on my door the next week with a tray of lemon bars and said simply, "We were rooting for you." I didn't cry. I smiled, took the lemon bars, and asked her if she liked coffee. Turns out she did. So did her husband, and their 3 grandkids who started showing up with sidewalk chalk and curious eyes. By the end of that week, the walkway outside my house bloomed with color. Little hands had scrawled crooked suns and misspelled names. Right outside my porch steps, in large looping letters, one of them had written, "You matter." It stopped me cold. Not because it was grand, but because it was true, and I hadn't heard it in so long, I almost didn't recognize it. Every day after that, I did a little more. Repaired the back fence, planted wildflowers in coffee tins. Refinished a chair I'd pulled from someone's curb. I stopped trying to erase the house's broken past. I just started layering beauty over it, board by board. And then one quiet Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. The message preview blinked back at me. "Vanessa. Hey, things have been rough. Any chance we could stay with you for a few nights? Just until I figure things out." There it was. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a quiet expectation that I'd still be the one to soften her fall, that I'd catch her again like I always had, that despite everything, she could still land in my kindness like a cushion. I sat down on the front steps, letting the message sit in my lap like a stone. The wind moved gently through the newly hung chimes by the door. Down the street, a child's bike rattled past. The sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, casting the porch in gold. I stared at the message. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I looked out at the crooked chalk writing "You matter" and let the stillness do its work. For so long, I'd confused softness with love, believed that turning the other cheek was the same as healing, that letting people back in without change was what good daughters and good sisters did. But healing had taught me something else. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can wish someone peace and still protect your door. So I opened my notes app, typed slowly, deliberately, and copied it into the message box. There's no space for lies here anymore. I wish you peace. I sat with it another moment. My finger hovered over send, not out of hesitation, but ceremony. Then I tapped it. Message delivered. I didn't watch to see if she read it. Instead, I walked back into the house that used to feel like a burden and now felt like a beginning. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table. No ring light, no pity. Just me and a chipped mug of mint tea. The sky outside turned lavender. I opened a book Aunt Irene had lent me and let myself breathe without bracing. Vanessa didn't reply, and I didn't expect her to. She had built her world on curated narratives and borrowed compassion, but stories only hold power when they're believed. Hers had unraveled. Mine had finally begun. There would be more days ahead, some messy, some healing. There would be mornings when I questioned myself, when loneliness whispered in old familiar ways. But now I knew how to answer it, with boundaries, with grace, with the quiet kind of strength that doesn't ask for applause. The next day I hosted a sidewalk cleanup with the neighborhood kids. We pulled weeds, collected soda cans, refilled chalk bins. I set out lemonade and cinnamon bread. Someone brought fresh strawberries. Jean brought deviled eggs. At some point, I looked up and realized I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I wasn't surviving in silence. I was part of something. Not a performance. Not a brand. Just a small circle of people showing up for one another. And that was more than I'd ever found trying to earn love from a family who only saw my value when it served their story. That night, I found an old wooden frame tucked away in a moving box. Inside it was a picture of me at 8, standing in a paper crown, arms awkwardly stiff at my side. And there, blurred but unmistakable in the background, Aunt Irene clapping like she was cheering for a whole parade. I pressed the glass gently, feeling the memory swell inside my chest. I slipped a handwritten note behind the photo like a signature I hadn't known I'd needed. You always had the light. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation, and I was home. It started with an invitation, typed in neat font on recycled paper tucked into my mailbox between utility bills and grocery flyers. The Skyline Estates Neighborhood Council cordially invites you to speak at our upcoming Voices of Renewal Forum. We'd love for you to share your journey of rebuilding both home and heart. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or decline. The word renewal felt so delicate, too clean for what I had crawled through, but maybe that was the point. A week later, I stood in the community hall beneath warm lights and folding chairs wearing the navy dress I'd almost thrown out last year when it reminded me of being overlooked. This time, I wore it like armor. The room wasn't packed. It didn't need to be. Neighbors. Volunteers, a few high schoolers taking notes for extra credit, enough eyes to see me, enough hearts to hear me. I took a breath. Then I spoke. I used to think survival was about silence. I began my voice steadier than I'd expected, about taking up less space, asking for less, becoming easier to love. I paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Some familiar, some not. Jean gave me a thumbs up from row 2. A little girl in front clutched a drawing of a sunflower. I learned that sometimes I continued what people call love is really just comfort. And if you stop performing, stop bending, they disappear. Or worse, they erase you while smiling to your face. A few heads nodded. One woman wiped at her eyes. I shared how I'd bought the house. The $900 gamble. The rain that first night. The text that told me not to come for Easter. I told them about the silence that followed, how it didn't shout, but smothered. But then I said, a small smile breaking through. I hung a curtain. A light laugh rose from the audience. That curtain, I said, was the first decision I made that wasn't for anyone else. It was crooked. The rod broke twice. The pattern was faded blue roses from my college apartment, but when the sun hit it, the room looked like it was breathing for the first time. I let the memory settle in the room like dust in sunlight. I used to think home was something other people built for you, something you had to be invited into. But sometimes home is what you choose to claim, even if it's cracked. Even if no one claps when you walk through the door, I glanced toward the back where the community board hung with flyers for gardening clubs and soup kitchens. My flyer, handwritten, was pinned beside them. Saturday cleanup meet at Claire's house. Lemonade and chalk provided. That was mine. I had built it. Not just the house. The life I closed with a story. There's a photo frame that sits above my coat rack, I said. Inside it is a picture of me at 8 wearing a paper crown from a school play. In the background, blurry, but certain, is my Aunt Irene. She's clapping like she believes I could take on the world. I held up the photo, letting them see, and behind that photo, I added, is a note in her handwriting. It says, "You always had the light." I paused. I didn't know how much I needed to read those words until I did. Applause began quietly. Then it swelled, not the kind you get out of pity or politeness, the kind that says, "We see you now." Afterward, a man from the council approached with a mason jar of wildflowers. He said, "You didn't just rebuild a house, you built a reason for people to gather again." And maybe that was it. The broken porch now held potted herbs and a welcome mat. The kitchen, once stage for someone else's story, now smelled of cinnamon and sage. The ceiling still leaked sometimes, but I'd learned where to place the bucket. And the door. It stayed locked for those who saw me as a prop, but wide open for anyone who saw me as a person. Later that night, I curled up under the same old quilt, the curtain swaying gently in the breeze. I looked around at the space I had painted, patched, repurposed. No one had handed it to me, no one had apologized, but here it was anyway, the home I had built with my own hands. I glanced up at the photo frame on the wall, lit by a strand of fairy lights strung across the window, and I whispered to myself, I still have the light. I never called. Not once. There were no late-night reconciliations, no soft-spoken apologies exchanged over coffee. I didn't reach out on holidays, didn't send birthday texts, didn't scroll through old photos asking myself if I'd overreacted, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn love, and I wasn't waiting for anyone to realize I deserved it all along. Instead, I wrote, late one evening, while the house hummed with the soft rhythm of rain on the tin roof, I opened my laptop and began to type, not a memoir, not a takedown, just the truth. Line by line. I wrote my way back through everything. The dinner table where silence was treated like consent, the curtain rod that refused to stay up, the photo with my shoulder peeking from behind Vanessa's perfect hair, the chalk writing from a child who didn't even know me but believed I mattered. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth exactly as it had unfolded. I titled the post simply, What I Learned in a $900 House. I hit publish without fanfare. The next morning, there were 3 comments. By noon, there were 300. By midnight, over 5,000 women from every corner of the country wrote to say, this is my story too. Sisters who had been the afterthought. Daughters who had been the caretaker, the workhorse, the one who was always too much until they were no longer needed. Some comments made me laugh. Some made me cry. All of them made me feel less alone. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. The act of being seen, finally, was its own reply. People shared the post across forums, newsletters, book clubs, podcasts. I was invited to speak on panels, asked to write more, not because I had suffered, but because I had survived and kept my softness intact. That part mattered most. I didn't become bitter. I didn't become someone else. I became me, just unfiltered. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, folded neatly, was a single piece of stationery. Your blog found me on a day I was planning to leave everything. Instead, I planted seeds. Thank you for building the door. I kept that note in the drawer next to the stove, tucked between coupons and old recipes. Some part of me liked the idea that survival could echo that far. A few months later, I stood in front of my house, now fully painted shutters, straightened porch, lined with small potted succulents and chimes that caught the breeze like laughter. I hadn't just made a home. I had made a whole life. Neighbors passed by and waved. Kids still chalked the sidewalk. My name was no longer whispered or pitied. It was known and respected. On one of those calm mornings, I printed the final piece of my story, a simple sentence in black script. I placed it in a wooden frame, one I'd sanded and stained myself, and hung it next to the photo of me in the paper crown, right by the door where I'd see it every time I stepped outside. I didn't lose a family, I found myself. That was it. No fireworks, no triumphant music. Just peace and a path forward. Because I had spent so long knocking on doors that wouldn't open, begging for a place at tables that only ever wanted to serve me crumbs. But now I had built my own door, and behind it was a home. Yes, but more importantly, a self I had finally invited in. Not out of desperation, but out of love.